Dr. Lorena V. Márquez is an associate professor and the chair of the Department of Chicanx Studies at University of California, Davis. She is currently the director of the Sacramento Movimiento, Chicano, and Mexican American Education Oral History Project, which has documented 125 oral interviews with local area movement activists and veteranos, Sacramento's Mexican American servicemen. Her book, La Gente: Struggles for Empowerment and Community Self-Determination in Sacramento, examines how La Gente, or everyday people, grappled with the ideologies, strategies, and political transformations of the civil rights era, an era she continues to explore in her forthcoming book. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Márquez.
Thank you. I first want to start by thanking the California State Library for inviting me to give this talk. I was very honored, and thank you all for tuning in. I'd also like to thank Dev and Sue and Marissa for being so wonderful in setting everything up. So I am going to go ahead and get started. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Today I'm going to be talking about the Sacramento Movimiento Chicano Oral History Project. I'm also going to be sharing a little bit of my new oral history project, the Veteranos, Sacramento's Mexican American Servicemen. And then I'm going to be reading a little portion of a chapter in my forthcoming book. And I'm happy to take any questions on any of those three topics. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the Sacramento Movimiento Chicano and Mexican American Education Oral History Project was founded in 2012 by Zenon Valadez. He was a professor at Sacramento State University, and he has, of course, since retired. And he came up with this idea to do an oral history project. He then solicited the help of Sam Rios, who has since passed, who was also a professor in the Department of Ethnic Studies, Chicano, the Chicano Studies program there, and his wife, Tina Rios. And they got a group of folks together. I had known Zenon because I had interviewed him for my dissertation, and so he knew I did work on the Chicano movement in Sacramento, and so he invited me to participate. And I consider myself an outsider because I'm not part of the Chicano movement cohort. And there was two outsiders that participated in the organizing of the oral histories, myself and the videographer Feliciano Valadez, who is Zenon's son. And he actually worked pro bono. He did all of the videos for free, all 98 actually of the videos. To date, we have 125 oral interviews. And I want to say that that's our finale, but you know how it is. I'm not really sure if we will continue to do additional interviews. I may open it up again. All of the interviews were done in 2014 and 2015. The bulk of them, 98 of them, were done in those 2 years, and 27 additional interviews were done in 2023. This archive is housed at the Donald and Beverly Girth Special Collections and University Archives at California State University, Sacramento. They're digitally available, so you can actually go online right now and you could see the collection. So the purpose of the archive was to collect histories of Chicana or movement elders from 1965 to 1980. The testimonials or interviews were captured as experienced by Sacramento activists and participants. And so it is their sort of understanding of the movement, their sort of position in the movement, what they learned, but also their early life. So we asked them, like, for instance, how did they get to Sacramento, or where, if they, were raised in Texas or other places, what brought them to Sacramento. And so we try to do a little bit of the local history as well. And then, as I noted already, these histories are digitally available to you all. And so the interviews were selected and identified by project committee members, and also through recommendations and referrals from the Sacramento Chicana movement cohort. So they know somebody who then knows somebody else, and that's how we got the list of folks. And I think because Zenon Valadez was sort of at the head of the initial set of interviews, folks knew him, trusted him, they trusted Sam Rios, and so they agreed to be interviewed. The majority of the interviews were conducted by undergraduate students in my Chicano Studies Methods course that I teach at UC Davis. And I trained them on how to conduct the interviews. I taught them about the Chicano movement, and so that they were aware of some of the important sort of big events of the Chicano movement. And it was quite an undertaking to have students from Davis commute all the way to Sacramento. The interviews were held at Sacramento City Community College. And so many of the students don't have cars, and they had to take the bus into Sacramento. And this is, before Uber and all of those things. So yeah, it was an undertaking, but I think that it was a very fruitful learning experience for the students to interview Chicano movement elders. In 2023, we had just a smaller group of interviews. There was 27 in total. And I actually trained Chicano movement elders to conduct those interviews. And this is a training that I did on how to conduct an oral interview. One of the things that I emphasized in this training especially was to make sure that they weren't engaging in a conversation during the interviews, to make sure that it was about the person that was being interviewed, and that they were sharing their stories. And which I'm sure was difficult for them, because they, had a lot in common, and they knew each other, many of them. So this process was a bit more challenging, but I also think that it was rewarding for them as well. And this is a photo of Clara Cid, and you can see Cristina Mora here interviewing her. And I did hire a videographer for this last set of interviews, Tomás Montoya, whose father is Jose Montoya, famous artist and founder of the Royal Chicano Air Force here in Sacramento. So he was very happy to do this work. And I think that, again, right, you're just sort of embodying trust in the community, and people know of you and are willing to do the interviews. And in 2017, we did a short documentary titled The Sacramento Chicano Movement from Voiceless to Empowered. We're still working on the last set of consent forms so that we can show the film, and we're hoping to actually gift it to Sacramento State so that folks can see the documentary. And it's not very long. It's about 27 minutes or 22. I can't remember exactly, but the purpose of that was that we were hoping to show it through our local PBS station, and we just haven't gotten around to that, but that is still a possibility. And we use the oral interviews, and so you see clips, and it's sort of narrated, and we worked on the language and to make the documentary. And here is a QR code if you're interested in looking at the oral interviews that I had just talked about here. And we do have future plans of producing 2 other documentaries, and also to have ethnic studies curriculum for high schools. And there's a deep sort of like a huge demand right now for ethnic studies curriculum. And, in fact, I just had a meeting last week with someone from Davis Unified School District. So I think that this is a great tool for high school, college students to use. They can, it's a primary source. They can hear from activists and participants of the Chicano movement. It's local history, it's social movement history. There's, history on gender and political organization. There's a lot that's highlighted in these interviews. And I think that when you talk about a movement, it's really important for folks to connect, right? To connect with people who were actually living participants or activists. And so I strongly encourage those of you who are educators to use this as a tool in classrooms and so forth. Okay, and I also wanted to talk a little bit about the Veteranos, Sacramento's Mexican-American Servicemen Oral History Project. I founded this in 2023, so we're just getting started. And they are housed, these interviews are housed through the Center for Sacramento History, and they're available on their YouTube channel. They have a YouTube channel. I'm sorry, I noticed here that I forgot to put Center for Sacramento History. And these are audio video recorded by a professional videographer. And I am interested in interviewing folks who participated in World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and Desert Storm. So if you know of anybody who fits this description, we are asking that they are at least in the Sacramento region for them to be able to participate, to be interviewed. And I am conducting all of those interviews myself. And we have a professional videographer who is in-house with the Center for Sacramento History. So please send them my way if you know of anybody who you think might be interested in being interviewed. And you can send them, just send me an email here, okay? And so there's a strong tradition of Mexican-American servicemen and in the Sacramento region. There was an organization founded by Mexican mothers known as Madres de Guerra, or Mexican War Mothers. And it was founded by Enriqueta Andazola, who's pictured here in the middle. She had almost all of her sons enlist in World War II. And so I just think it's really important for us to get the contributions of servicemen and women and to begin to record those histories. I think right now we're probably at around 18 interviews and counting. So this is very much a very live archive in terms of getting those interviews done. And the videographer, he's really great. We take pictures. Everyone who gets interviewed brings pictures, and as we're conducting the interview, he will post those pictures as they're talking. So I think that's really a nice addition to the archive collection. All right. So I'm going to go ahead now and talk about my forthcoming book, In Their Voices, Chicano Movement Elders' Reflections on the Civil Rights Era. And please forgive me, I'm going to be reading along here on a chapter that I've been working on. So I am a Chicana historian who interrogates issues of memory, trauma, identity, resistance, resiliency, and history making and community archival building within the framework of the Chicano movement in Sacramento, California. The findings of the Sacramento Movimiento Chicano and Mexican American Education Oral History Project serve as the basis for my second book project, tentatively titled In Their Voices, Chicana Movement Elders' Reflections on the Civil Rights Era. The book will delve into important historical inquiries on identity formation and political agency during the Civil Rights Era. This paper presentation focuses on early renderings of a chapter on racial and language trauma in that book. Drawing from the interviews, I examine early childhood memories as told by members of this cohort who came of age during World War II and the Korean War. Many were the children of Mexican immigrants and straddled two worlds, the Mexican and the American. The demarcation of these two public and private spheres often collided on schoolyards and when they stepped out of their ethnic barrios. This cohort received a K-12 education in the U.S. Their stories form part of the larger history of racialization and segregation. They represent a generation of survivors of the inferior complex model that was instituted in the educational structure and society in the mid-20th century. By understanding who they were, where they came from, and how racism in early life traumatized them, we can begin to better understand the impetus to fight for social justice in the 1960s and 70s. As a scholar of race and ethnicity, gender, and class, I am not immune to racial trauma. I have lived with and continue to process racial trauma in my daily life. As a professor who teaches Chicanx history, I am often triggered by the very lectures and subsequent discussions in class. Likewise, often after class, Chicanx and Latinx students approach me and confide in me their own experience and intergenerational racial trauma as they connect with class materials. This process is repeated over the span of a course and throughout a span of many years. It never goes away, and for scholars of color, it goes with the territory of teaching courses on race and ethnicity. We embody race, and race embodies us. Although racial trauma is relatively a new scholarly concept, tracing back to approximately 20 years, it has offered scholars of race and ethnicity a theoretical framework from which to situate their work. African American and Native American scholars in particular have written extensively on racial trauma and its persistence in everyday life. For example, Dr. Joy DeGroy, a mental health clinician and racial trauma expert, coined the term post-traumatic slave syndrome to understand how African Americans adapted their behaviors over centuries in order to survive the stifling effects of chattel slavery, end quote. Dr. DeGroy explains that trauma is caused by a violent force or event that can be experienced physically, emotionally, and or psychologically. Even one traumatic experience, she argues, has lasting consequences, such as dysfunctional behaviors and or distorted attitudes. Recent research supports the theory that trauma can be passed through generations and even an individual's DNA. The enslavement of African Americans having been one of the most traumatic historical experiences in the U.S., has had lasting effects on those ancestors. DeGroy argues that those, quote, traumatized adapted their attitudes and behaviors in order to simply survive, and these adaptations continue to manifest today, end quote. Hence, racial trauma is passed generationally through learned behavior and observations. Understanding racial trauma within the context of oral histories is a necessary methodological tool because it helps reveal overt and covert forms of resistance, resiliency, and healing in marginalized communities. Racial trauma is not contained in the past. It often rests in the subconscious and resurfaces through triggers that poke at the memory. Resmaa Menakem, a healer and racial therapist, characterizes racial trauma as both physical and psychological responses. She notes it's in the body's, she notes, quote, it is the body's protective response to an event or a series of events that it perceives as potentially dangerous, end quote. Racial trauma has existed since colonization reigned, and with it, a racial hierarchical order. Race scholar Sheila Wise Rowe explains, people of color have endured traumatic histories and almost daily assaults on their dignity, and we are told to get over it. We have prayed about the racism, been in denial, or acted out in anger, but we have not known how to individually or collectively pursue healing from the racial trauma, end quote. Coping with racial trauma has not been fully explored, partly because the individual who experiences the trauma may not yet comprehend its effects on the body, mind, and the spirit. Frankly, identifying racism as traumatic and spiritually inflicting is difficult to speak about openly because it opens old wounds, reshames, creates a cycle of victim blaming, and in some cases even inflicts internal racism, where one begins to hate what was deemed othered or inferior by the oppressing class. Yet both Rowe and DeGroy urge us to acknowledge racial trauma so that we can begin the healing process, whether it's our own or communal. I argue that oral histories offer the best research method to uncover racial trauma as experienced by elders that came of age during Jim Crow, including ethnic Mexicans. For instance, in the American Southwest, it was common to practice barring ethnic Mexicans entrance to certain businesses, establishments, such as churches, hotels, motels, restaurants, cemeteries, housing, beauty shops, barbershops, clubhouses, swimming pools, water fountains, public restrooms, theaters, prisons, and hospitals. Sometimes signs were posted on business doors or at a storefront window that read, "We serve whites only, no Spanish or Mexicans," or "No dogs, Negroes, or Mexicans allowed." Historian Ignacio Garcia, in his work on Jim Crow, Texas, reminds us that, quote, those perpetrating the rejection understood well that the word of mouth was enough to let other Mexicans know they were not wanted. For every one of the 110 individuals who filed formal complaints for not being served, there were hundreds of others who did not protest or who simply avoided such places. end quote. In other words, ethnic Mexican patrons learned to navigate the white supremacy social order, and while some resisted through formal complaints, most hesitantly obeyed such racial restrictions. However, even going along with racial hierarchy, social norms left embedded in the psyche feelings of racial inferiority, at the very minimum feeling or feelings of second-class citizens, or the feeling of being subpar humans. The signs literally spelling out "no dogs" before listing Mexicans and quote Negroes was a deliberate act to strip them of their humanity. Maximiliano Max Mendoza, born in 1934 in Bristol, Colorado, recalled in a recent interview, "After I started school, it's a lot different because your mom always hugs you and kisses you and loves you and speaks to you in Spanish. But then I started school, and Spanish wasn't permitted. Those people still had those pioneer attitudes that they used to have signs that would say no Mexicans or dogs allowed. Even though I couldn't read, but my brothers would say, well, we can't go in there. Allí no se permite. It's not permitted. They have a sign there that says no dogs or no Mexicans." And that was ugly. But nevertheless, we made it because we were strong and we're here and we are still marching. For Mendoza, the "no dogs and Mexicans allowed" sign stands vividly in his memory as a symbol of hate and racism. Although he was too young to even read the sign for himself, he understood that he could not enter the establishment because of his race and ethnicity, stating simply it was ugly. An ugly way to keep Mexicans out, keeping them down and keeping them in their place. Racial trauma often makes people of color feel powerless because it strips them of their humanity and reduces them to a racial stereotype. There are multiple forms of racism that can be equally and psychologically damaging. For example, institutional, structural, systemic racism is perpetrated in schools, medical facilities, housing, financial services, government, courts, law enforcement, and the military. These have tremendous effect on one's ability to build socioeconomic upward mobility, affecting where one can buy a home or even strip them of the opportunity of home ownership, access to higher paying jobs, and even sentences handed down in court. Racism can be experienced individually or in a group setting, whether it's name calling, being singled out or harassed because of race, or being referred to as a racial stereotype. These incidents contribute to psychological racial trauma, oftentimes making the victim feel shame and or hurt and not being able to adequately address the perpetrators at the time of injury, sometimes feeling numb or in a state of shock, unable to defend oneself, or then feeling shame for not speaking out. In essence, they freeze to avoid further psychological infliction. Often the damage is irreversible. The educational system operated as a racialized institution because it often attempted to deny Chicana and Chicano students of their ethnic and cultural identities, as was commonly practiced with Native Americans. For instance, American Indian boarding schools were instrumental in stripping children of their indigenous names and assigning anglicized names in an attempt to whiten their identities. It manifested in a deliberate government effort to change tribal names to better fit or make readable names, especially as Native Americans became property owners. Chicanas and Chicanos were also subject to Americanization process, especially in California, when in 1915, the California state legislature passed the Home Teacher Act, which targeted Mexican immigrant women as the original transmitters of culture, language, and sanitation. The goal was to institute English as the primary language at home, oftentimes by extension of Americanization logics. Spanish names were anglicized. This process of racialization happened as early as elementary school, where kids were at the most vulnerable age and unable to fully comprehend the cultural and social costs of Americanization. Miguel Escobedo, born in 1954, recalled in a recent interview, because as a child growing up, I always had this thing how we were treated by the Anglos. I remember going in elementary, my name was Miguel, and they made me spell it like my name as Michael. And all these years until I was a teenager, I always thought my name was Michael because of the school, the way they changed my name. And one day I ran into my birth certificate. I asked my mother, hey, I never knew my name was Miguel. She goes, oh, yeah, it was something I always never knew, but that was just part of the way it was back then. For Escobedo, the changing of a name, I'm sorry. The changing of the name happened at such an early age that he did not even remember being called Miguel. He experienced a bit of confusion or disconnect with one's memory. He questioned, how come I didn't know this? His mother's response only adds to the perplexity of the event, as if it were no big deal to change one's name to better fit into American society. The process of Americanization then can be a disarming and traumatic experience. My work also attempts to understand the effects of what I term language trauma. Although racism trauma has been largely explored by African and Native American scholars, little has been explored in terms of language trauma. I argue that the Chicano Spanish-speaking children in the American Southwest experience language trauma in K through 12 educational system. In 1968, the United States Commission on Civil Rights investigated 5 southwestern states: Texas, Arizona, California, Colorado, and New Mexico. The report noted that educational institutions failed to value cultural difference and did not adapt policies or procedures to ensure the success and a positive educational outcome of Chicano students. Instead, and I'm quoting here, instead the schools used a variety of exclusionary practices which deny the Chicano student the use of his language, a pride in his heritage, and the support of his community, end quote. According to the report, 1/3 of the schools surveyed reported discouraging the use of Spanish language in the classroom. Some schools exercise a no Spanish rule by simply discouraging the use of Spanish to actually punishing students for speaking Spanish. No further details of what constituted punishment were disclosed, but some of the students who were interviewed in these hearings talked about corporal punishment, which was widely practiced in the state of Texas. The Sacramento Movimiento Oral History and Mexican American Education Oral History Project collection is ripe with firsthand accounts of language trauma. Through the Sacramento Movimiento and Mexican American Education Project, we can begin to identify how racial trauma was experienced by the Chicano movement generation. Responses to trauma are unique to each individual. The retelling of racist incidents often provoked painful recollections as the mind races to try to find reasoning, purpose, and takeaways. This process is never identical, but the fundamentals are there. Racial trauma requires the body and spirit to meet to transform a negative experience into one of purpose. It often elicits an emotional response that is difficult to contain. As a historian who works with oral histories, we must continue to work carefully with these testimonios to understand how racial trauma is ever present. And that concludes my my presentation. I think we have time for questions.
Marissa? All right, we do have a few questions that have come in, so I'll start with the first one. The attendee says, "Thank you for this presentation. Is the proper term Chicana, Chicano, or Chicanx? I've heard different things from different people."
Okay, so that's a really hard question to answer. I'm just going to answer it. This is my use of the term, and I'll explain why. So the term Chicanx is sort of all-encompassing of folks who identify as non-binary or with either gender. And then for the Chicano movement cohort, I use Chicano to identify this group because that's the term they used and it's historically accurate. And so I don't want to be putting a label that is very recent to this generation. And many of them do not identify as Chicanx. So I just choose to use the term when I'm talking about the movement as Chicana, Chicano.
Thank you. Yeah, our next question is, did the narrators receive stipends or honorariums for sharing their histories?
No, nobody received any money. And you know, I unfortunately I'm a horrible grant writer. I probably could have gotten money, but to do these archives, but I do think that it represents sort of an authenticity to the archive too, because nobody's getting paid, including the people who volunteered to organize. So I do think it's a grassroots model. I wish we did pay. Well, we didn't pay. We had Sacramento City Community College did give us free parking. So we were able to do that. And I think it was $1 back then. It probably went up to $5. I don't know. But, community colleges aren't as expensive as like my campus. It's like $10 to park there.
Thank you. Our next question, has your team been able to index or create transcripts from the interviews recorded so far?
Yeah, so thank you for that. We did, so the interviews are at the Sacramento State University, and somebody donated some money for some of the transcriptions. So a lot of them have transcriptions. I think we are about 30 that do not. And I plan to pay for the transcriptions out of my research fund through the university, my university. So I'm working on that. But yeah, they will all be transcribed, and Sac State has done like an amazing job in coding them, and so that folks can easily look up, the name of an organization, for instance, and then yeah, so we're really excited that Sac State has put in the resources to index a lot of those interviews.
Another question about the interviews. Are they conducted in English and Spanish?
So I would say that they are Spanglish. I do think that there's 2 or 3 that are just solely in Spanish, and then the rest are in English, but they use Spanish intermittently. So
And then one attendee asked, were translations made of the transcripts? And if so, what resources were used for those translations?
I think the ones that are in Spanish are not transcribed yet. Oh, I don't understand the translation. I'm not really sure what that means. Oh, like from English to Spanish, from Spanish to English. I don't think we've done that, but we will do that. And I will make sure that they're accurate. Yeah.
So one person asks, how do you establish an archive? What tools or access might you need to establish an archive from scratch? How do you decide where to house it, such as which library, etc.? If you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. So I think that it's really important to have community support if you're going to do it the way we did, which was grassroots. And you need to have trusted folks in the community. I think any social movement, but folks aren't just going to give you their story and trust you with it, especially if it's a marginalized community. They need to know that their interview is in good hands and that you've actually been vetted in some way. So I think establishing trust in the community is really big. I would make, once you have a group and you decide, okay, we want to start collecting these interviews of maybe like a barrio and you're in the town or what have you. Then you start saying, okay, where could we house these? Or what archives are available? And before you do any of the interviews, please, please, please make sure that you have consent forms. And that those consent forms are legally accurate, because we actually had we had consent forms and then Sac State had their own. So then we had to go back and get them to sign them again. And some of the people had passed away. And so we have some that we didn't get a consent form and we're trying to locate family. And that's been very, very difficult. So you want to make sure you have the consent forms, and then you either want to hire a videographer or have somebody like we did, which did it pro bono, because that can get very expensive very quickly. Equipment is very expensive. And then I would absolutely, like, as soon as you get a consent form, you scan it. You don't want them to be lost. And no individual should have sole control of the collection, because if something happens to the individual, or say, there's a flood or something, you just never know. So you always want to have checks and balances in terms of who has the collection and when it's turned over to an archive. Some people don't want to turn their stuff over to an archive, and I understand why. I understand some of the reservations in terms of that, but I think that when it's at an archive, then they are responsible, like, for making it digitally available. Like, what if the technology changes and you just don't have things are so fluid that you want to make sure that everything is safe, right? And so for myself as a participant of collecting these archives, these interviews, I just felt a sense of relief once they were handed over to Sacramento State University. And they understand this is a community archive. We have a great deal of control over how that collection is used. And anything that goes on the website, for instance, they check with me or with the group to make sure that we're okay with it. And so having that sort of equal standing with the archive, I think, has made it so that we continue to want to work with them, and we feel like it's in good hands.
Thank you. Our next question. How have students responded to the opportunity creating an oral history provides to write a different history than what they might have learned?
it was so empowering. They were so nervous. It was like, some of them say, "Oh, it's like interviewing my grandparents," or it felt like a very big responsibility. I I did stress that a lot, right, with them, that this is a very sort of formal interview, and they got dressed up. I had them get dressed up like in professional wear, whatever that meant for them. But um, I think it was empowering for them. And then also, I think that the elders very much enjoyed, because when you get to a certain point in your life, I think it's important. People want to have their stories continue, and like the younger generation to learn from them. So yeah, so I saw that in the interviews when they were explaining to the students. You could tell, right, when they were explaining to the students certain things. And I don't know, just it made like a very sort of a beautiful experience for the interviewer and the interviewee.
Great, thank you. Now another question. What kind of feedback have you gotten about the interviews from the people who were interviewed and the people who listened to them?
Um, so I have received some comments from friends or colleagues that I have that teach at other universities that are using the archive for their classes, and I'm just so happy because this isn't about me. This isn't about, it's like that. It's about this generation, and it's about Sacramento. And so for me, being able to be a participant in organizing and sharing that with the world, and it's the most validating experience, honestly. I think the elders that participated, they're glad they did. For 2014, 2015, you're looking at 10 years ago, right? So we've lost a lot in those 10 years, a lot of the elders that were interviewed. And that's really sad. But then I'm just really grateful that we had the opportunity to conduct an interview when they were well.
Absolutely, thank you. It looks like we have one more question. So this person asked, can you conduct an oral history interview if you are from that community, or should you be an outsider?
One more time, the question.
Sure. The attendee asks, can you conduct an oral history interview if you are from that community, or should you be a quote outsider?
Absolutely, I would say that you can do that. There's a lot of secondary literature on conducting interviews. They're very helpful. They give great points about how to conduct an interview. I think the selection of the questions are really important. So the questions were done by the committee. Everything was approved by them, and every person that was interviewed was asked the same questions. So there's a sort of integrity to the entire collection, I think, in that way. But I myself felt that I could conduct those interviews because number one, they trusted me, and number two, the interview wasn't about me; it was about them, and I was going to be using the same questions. So yeah, I think as long as the trust is there, you should feel comfortable in being conducting the interviews yourself.
Great, thank you. I think that is all of our questions.
We have one accidentally put in the chat that we still have, we have time that we could get to. It's for someone conducting their first oral history interview, any suggestions or advice on how to be most effective?
I would say to definitely go down the questions, solidify your questions, make sure the questions make sense, and try to figure out what the purpose, like what is the purpose of the interview or the archive. So for this instance, right, it's Chicano movement elders who participated from 65 to 80. So all the questions fell within that category. Once you have a very solid list of questions, then you should feel pretty confident in asking the questions. I always think that interviewing is a skill that not everybody has, and you genuinely have to enjoy listening to people, right? Like you cannot be bored, you can't be yawning, you know, you have to have a real sort of passion for listening to people's stories and trying to capture that as much as possible. Because some people love going off tangents, so you want to make sure that you're structured. Let's go back to this question, you know, that kind of thing. I hope that helped. I'm sorry.
Thank you. And it looks like one last one has come in, which I think we have just enough time for.
Okay.
So they ask, have you run across family members with varied or diverse recollections of events experienced?
I have one example of that. And oral histories are not 100% accurate, number one. So people's recollections of things vary, even when you press them for dates. So one of the family members who disagreed was somebody who the person we interviewed had passed away. We reached out to the daughter. The daughter looked at the interview. Then the daughter's like, oh, you know, we need to take that part of what they said about this town. That's not accurate. And yeah, and it's kind of like, well, what do you do? What do you say to that? That's their experience. That's their, it's not meant to be 100% accurate. So you don't want to, you know, give in too much when folks are asking you to delete stuff, because then the integrity of the interview is compromised.
Yeah. And I think that is all. So Dev?
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, Dr. Márquez. This has been a wonderful talk. I try to encourage people to, you know, at least interview their family members if they can. I did that for myself, and it's something that I treasure, the interviews I have with my great aunt Essie. So thank you so much for your talk. And for everybody else, thank you for joining us tonight.